The year was 1967, and Harvey Mitchell was the only farmer in Madison County, Nebraska, who didn't show up at the John Deere unveiling event at Benson's Implement in Norfolk. It was a big deal. The dealership had put up banners, ordered catering, hired a local band. Every farmer within 30 miles had received a personal invitation in the mail, embossed paper with gold lettering. You're invited to see the future of farming. That Saturday afternoon in June, more than 200 farmers packed into the dealership lot, crowding around the new 4020 tractors like they were moon rockets. In a way, they were. The 4020 represented everything modern about farming in 1967: power, efficiency, technology, progress. Harvey Mitchell wasn't there. He was home, 43 years old, in his shop behind his barn, rebuilding the carburetor on his 1949 Farmall H. The June heat made the shop feel like an oven, but Harvey didn't mind. He had the radio on, listening to a ball game, working methodically through the carburetor rebuild he'd done probably 30 times over 18 years. The Farmall H was old by any measure. 18 years of hard work, 8,000 hours on the meter, faded red paint, rust showing through on the hood, the seat worn down to the springs. If Harvey tried to sell it, he might get $800 if he found the right buyer. But Harvey wasn't looking to sell. The tractor ran fine, started every morning, pulled his 4-row planter without complaint, and most importantly, had been paid for since April 14, 1949, the day his father Walter Mitchell had bought it brand new for $1,750 cash. Walter had driven to the International Harvester dealer in Norfolk, counted out $1,400 bills and $50 in smaller bills, and driven the Farmall home. No financing, no loan, just cash, and the tractor was his. Harvey remembered that day. He'd been 11 years old, had watched his father inspect every inch of that tractor before accepting delivery. Walter had made the dealer start it 5 times to make sure it started easy, had checked every fluid, every belt, every connection. Only then had he handed over the money. "You pay cash for what you can afford," Walter had told Harvey that day. "And if you can't afford it cash, you can't afford it at all." Walter Mitchell had farmed through the Depression, had watched neighbors lose everything to debt in the 1930s. He'd sworn his son would never experience that. Harvey had inherited both the farm and that philosophy when Walter died suddenly of a heart attack in 1955, leaving Harvey at 31 with 240 acres of paid-for land and that 1949 Farmall H. At the dealership event that Saturday, Harvey's neighbors were experiencing what the head salesman, a smooth-talking man named Jim Benson, called the future of farming. The John Deere 4020 was genuinely revolutionary. 80 horsepower, which was massive for 1967, power steering that made 12-hour days feasible, independent PTO, so you could stop the tractor without stopping the implement, differential lock for traction, synchronized transmission that was easier on the clutch. Everything a modern farmer needed to compete in the new agricultural economy. Jim Benson was a professional. He'd been selling farm equipment since 1952, had perfected his pitch over 15 years. He knew how to read farmers, knew how to plant seeds of doubt about their old equipment, knew how to make them feel like they were falling behind if they didn't modernize. "Gentlemen," Jim said, standing on a platform next to a bright green 4020. "Farming is changing. The old ways don't work anymore. You're competing in a global market now. Your neighbors are modernizing. If you don't keep up, you'll be left behind." He let that sink in, watching the farmers shift uncomfortably. "Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, 'Jim, that's a beautiful machine, but I can't afford it.' Well, let me tell you something. You can't afford not to have it. This tractor will increase your productivity by 30%. 30%! That means more acres planted, more acres harvested, more income. This machine pays for itself." More nodding. The farmers wanted to believe. "The price is $6,800, Jim continued. "I know that sounds like a lot. That's more than most of you gross in a year. But here's the beautiful thing. You don't need $6,800. You need $134 a month. We've partnered with John Deere Credit to offer financing at 6.5% interest over 5 years. That's less than you spend on fuel in a month. Can you afford $134 a month to triple your productivity? Of course you can." The math was compelling. $134 a month sounded manageable. That was 4 or 5 loads of corn at current prices. Any farmer could swing that, especially with the productivity gains the new tractor would bring. What Jim Benson didn't mention, what he never mentioned, was the total cost. $134 a month for 60 months was $8,040. So you'd pay $8,040 for a $6,800 tractor. An extra $1,240 in interest, 18% more than the purchase price. And that assumed you never missed a payment, never had a bad year, never needed to defer or restructure. 3 of Harvey's close neighbors signed contracts that afternoon, swept up in the excitement and the peer pressure and Jim Benson's smooth assurances. Bill Henderson, who farmed 320 acres west of Madison. Bill was 41, had 2 teenage sons, had inherited his land from his father. Good farmer, hard worker, respected in the community. Bill signed on the dotted line, committed to 60 months of $134 payments. Tom Cooper, 400 acres south of town. Tom was 45, had been farming since he came back from Korea in 1953. 3 daughters, all in school. Tom looked at that shiny green 4020 and saw his future. He signed. Ed Wilson, 480 acres east toward Norfolk. Ed was 48, the oldest of the 3. He'd been farming since 1941, had 26 years of experience. Ed knew better, but he signed anyway. Everyone else was doing it. How could everyone be wrong? All 3 men walked out of that dealership that afternoon owing $6,800 plus interest, feeling excited, feeling modern, feeling like they'd just made the smartest decision of their farming careers. When Harvey's wife Martha asked him that evening why he hadn't gone to the event, why he hadn't even been curious, Harvey just shrugged. He was at the kitchen table, cleaning his hands with Gojo, trying to get the carburetor grease out from under his fingernails. "Didn't see the point," Harvey said. "We've got a tractor that works. Don't need to spend a Saturday afternoon looking at something I can't afford." "Bill Henderson bought one of those new 4020s, Martha said. She'd heard about it at Elmer's grocery in town. The news had spread fast. 3 local farmers buying new tractors on the same day was big news in Madison County. Betty Henderson was so excited, said it's going to revolutionize their operation. Harvey dried his hands on a dish towel, careful not to get grease on it. Martha was particular about that. "Good for Bill. I hope it works out for him. But we don't need to revolutionize anything. We need to keep farming and keep the land paid for." Martha was quiet for a moment, then asked gently, "Don't you ever want something new, Harvey? Don't you ever want to have nice equipment like the other farmers?" It wasn't nagging. Martha never nagged. She was just curious about her husband's thinking. They'd been married 20 years, and sometimes she still didn't fully understand his extreme conservatism about money. Harvey thought about her question seriously. "Sure I do," he admitted. "I see those new tractors, and yeah, I'd love to have one. Air-conditioned cab, power steering, all the modern features would make the work easier, more comfortable." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "But Martha, I want to own our land more than I want a new tractor. And I don't think you can do both. I watched my dad barely hold on to this place during the Depression. Watched him scrape and save and sacrifice to keep it. He told me before he died, 'Harvey, the minute you start owing money on the land or the equipment, you stop owning it. The bank owns it, and they'll take it first chance they get.'" Harvey looked out the kitchen window at his 240 acres, at the land his father had protected through the Depression. "I'd rather farm with old equipment on land I own than farm with new equipment on land the bank owns. That's just how I see it." Martha nodded. She understood. Her own father had lost a farm to debt in 1934. She'd been 6 years old, remembered crying as strangers loaded their furniture into a wagon, remembered her mother's face, remembered the shame. She never wanted her children to experience that. Over the next 2 years, Harvey watched his neighbor's farm with their new John Deere 4020s. The tractors were impressive, he had to admit. Faster, more powerful, more comfortable than his old Farmall. Bill Henderson could plow 20 acres a day with his new tractor. Harvey's Farmall could do maybe 12 on a good day. But Harvey also noticed something else. His neighbors looked stressed in a way they hadn't before. At the grain elevator, at church, at the cafe in town, they had a tension about them. Bill Henderson especially. He'd aged 5 years in too. In 1969, Harvey was at the co-op buying seed corn when Bill pulled up in his pickup. Bill looked exhausted, his eyes red-rimmed, his face drawn. "Bill, you all right?" Harvey asked. Bill leaned against his truck. "Having a rough time, Harvey. Corn prices are down. Had some hail damage. Making the tractor payment is getting tight. Can you defer it? Talk to the bank?" Bill shook his head. "Already behind 1 month. They're not flexible. And the worst part is, I got talked into buying a new combine last year too. Another payment. I'm at $300 a month just on equipment. That's $3,600 a year just to service debt." Harvey did quick math in his head. Bill farmed 320 acres, mostly corn and some soybeans. At current prices, he'd be grossing maybe $35 per acre or $11,200 total. After seed, fertilizer, fuel, and other expenses, he'd be netting maybe $5,000. The equipment payments alone were eating 70% of his profit. "What are you going to do?" Harvey asked. "Keep farming, hope prices improve. What else can I do?" That conversation stuck with Harvey. He went home and pulled out his own farm ledger, the one he'd been keeping since he took over from his father in 1955. His total equipment debt, 0. His land debt, 0. His gross income last year, $8,200 from 240 acres. His net profit after all expenses, $3,800. Not as much as Bill's gross, but all of it his to keep. The 1970s brought challenges. Prices fluctuated wildly. The economy was unpredictable. Inflation hit double digits. The farm crisis was still a decade away, but the seeds were being planted in the late 60s and early 70s as farmers took on debt, assuming prices would stay high. Bill Henderson lost his farm in 1973, 6 years after buying that John Deere 4020. The bank foreclosed on October 18th, a cold Thursday morning when the corn was still in the field, 3 weeks from harvest ready. Harvey read about it in the Madison County Star, a small notice in the legal section. Foreclosure sale, 320 acres, improvements, equipment, Henderson property, date, November 3rd, 1973. Harvey drove over to Bill's place that Saturday, found Bill in his machine shed working on the 4020. The tractor looked good still, well maintained, but Bill looked terrible. He'd lost maybe 30 pounds, had deep circles under his eyes, moved like a man twice his age. "Bill," Harvey said. Bill looked up from the tractor, wiped his hands on a rag. "Harvey, come to see the circus." "Come to see a friend." Bill laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Some friend, been farming 6 years with this beautiful machine, and I'm losing everything. You've been farming 20 years with equipment from 1949, and you're fine. What's that say about me?" "Says you took a risk that didn't pan out," Harvey said carefully. "We've had 6 tough years, Bill. Prices haven't been good. Weather's been spotty. Even good farmers struggled. But you didn't struggle." "I didn't have payments," Harvey said quietly. "That's the only difference." Bill sat down on the running board of the 4020, suddenly looked like he might cry. I was so sure, Harvey. In '67, everyone said modernize or die. Everyone said the old ways were finished. This tractor was supposed to save us, supposed to increase productivity, make us competitive. And it did. I could plow more, plant more, harvest more. But none of that mattered because I couldn't make the payment when prices dropped. He looked at Harvey. You know what kills me? This tractor is going to sell at auction for maybe $3,500. Half what I paid, and I still owe $200 on it. So the bank gets $3,500 toward my debt, but I still owe them money after 6 years of payments. Bill wiped his eyes. They're taking the land too. Appraiser says it'll bring $300 an acre. That's $89,600 to $96,000. But I owe $76,000 on various loans. So after they take their cut, I'll walk away with maybe $15,000 from 320 acres that my grandfather homesteaded in 1889. Harvey didn't know what to say. What could you say? We're moving to Omaha, Bill continued. Got a job lined up at the armor plant. Betty's devastated. Kids don't understand. Hell, I don't understand. How do you do everything right and still lose? I'm sorry, Bill. Yeah, me too. Harvey went to Bill's auction on November 3rd. Stood in the back, watched everything sell. The John Deere 4020 brought $3,400. The combine, the planter, the cultivator, all sold for 50 cents on the dollar. The land sold for $285 an acre, $91,200 total. After the bank took their $76,000, Bill walked away with $15,200 and a moving truck full of furniture. He moved to Omaha, started work at the Armour meatpacking plant the following Monday. Betty got a job as a secretary at an insurance company. They rented a small house in South Omaha. Bill never farmed again, never even talked about farming. Too painful. Tom Cooper hung on longer than Bill, made it until 1978. But the story was the same. Bought new equipment on credit, had decent years in the early 70s, then got hit with bad weather and bad prices in 76 and 77. Missed payments. Bank foreclosed. Tom's 400 acres sold at auction in May of 1978 for $320 an acre, $128,000 total. Tom owed $98,000. He walked away with $30,000 after 11 years of farming. Moved his family to Grand Island. Got a job at a farm equipment factory. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. He'd lost his farm to equipment debt. And now he was building equipment for other farmers to go into debt for. Ed Wilson was the last of the three to fall. Made it all the way to 1981, 14 years after buying that John Deere 4020. But the farm crisis was really hitting hard by then, and Ed couldn't hold on. His 480 acres sold for $308 an acre at auction, $182,400. But Ed owed $145,000 between equipment loans, operating loans, and land debt he'd taken on in the late 70s trying to expand. He walked away with $37,400 and moved to Lincoln to work construction. Through all of this, Harvey Mitchell just kept farming. He'd replaced his 1949 Farmall H with a used 1959 Farmall 560 in 1974, paying $2,400 cash. The 49H had finally given out after 25 years, transmission shot, engine burning oil, not worth fixing. But that was okay. It had served well. Harvey sold it for $300 to a hobby farmer who wanted to restore it. The 1959 560 was 15 years old when Harvey bought it, had 6,500 hours, needed some work. Harvey spent 2 weeks in his shop rebuilding the hydraulics and fixing the clutch. Total parts cost $480. When he was done, he had a fully functional tractor for $2,980. A new John Deere 4430 in 1974 cost $18,500. In 1979, Harvey added a used 1965 John Deere 3020 to his operation. Bought it at an estate sale for $4,800 cash. The tractor had belonged to a farmer who died, and the widow was selling everything. The 3020 was 14 years old, had 8,800 hours, but ran well. Harvey spent a weekend going through it, found the engine was solid, replaced some worn parts, and put it to work. So there was Harvey in 1979, farming his 240 acres with a 20-year-old Farmall 560 and a 14-year-old John Deere 3020. Total investment in equipment, $7,280, both tractors paid for. Meanwhile, farmers who'd bought new in the mid-70s were drowning in payments of $500, $800 per month. In 1983, 26 years after Harvey started farming, he got a phone call that would change everything. It was from a lawyer named Robert Chen in Norfolk. "Mr. Mitchell, my name is Robert Chen. I'm handling property liquidation for First Federal Bank. They have a foreclosed farm property that's been on their books for 10 years, and they're motivated to sell. It's the former Henderson property, 320 acres west of Madison. They're asking $220 an acre." Harvey knew the property intimately. He'd watched Bill Henderson farm it for years. Good land, flat bottomland, same quality as his own. "What's the condition of the improvements?" "Farmhouse needs work, barn needs work, but the land is solid. To be honest, Mr. Mitchell, the bank is desperate to unload this. They've had it since 1973. It's been a dead asset for a decade. If you're interested, I think there's room to negotiate." Harvey was 59 years old. He'd been farming his 240 acres for 28 years. The idea of expanding, of buying more land, had honestly never occurred to him. He was content with what he had. But 320 more acres, especially at the right price. He drove out to look at the property that Saturday. The farmhouse was empty, windows broken, roof sagging. Vandals had gotten in. The barn was in bad shape, wouldn't be worth salvaging. But the land itself was perfect. Black soil, good drainage, same quality as his own farm. Harvey went home and pulled out his bank statements. He had $84,000 in savings, accumulated over 28 years of farming without debt. Never had an equipment payment, never had a land payment, just lived frugally, saved every spare dollar, and watched it accumulate at 5% interest. He called Robert Chen on Monday. "I'll give you $200 an acre for the Henderson property, $64,000 cash. Take it or leave it." There was a pause. Then, "Let me talk to the bank, I'll call you back." Chen called back 3 hours later. "They'll take it. $64,000 cash. When can you close?" "This week." Harvey paid cash for Bill Henderson's old farm, the farm Bill had lost to debt 10 years earlier. Suddenly Harvey was farming 560 acres instead of 240. At 59 years old, he'd more than doubled his operation. In 1985, Tom Cooper's old farm became available through a similar situation. Different bank, same story. Foreclosed property they'd held for years, desperate to unload it. Tom's 400 acres, good land, sold to Harvey for $215 an acre. Harvey paid $86,000 cash. Now he was farming 960 acres. 2 years later, in 1987, Ed Wilson's farm hit the market. Harvey bought it for $240 an acre, 480 acres, $150 and $200, all cash. Now he owned 1,240 acres. By 1990, Harvey Mitchell, the farmer everyone thought was backwards in 1967, owned 3 times as much land as any of his neighbors. The 3 farms that his neighbors had lost trying to modernize, trying to compete, trying to leverage their way to success, Harvey had bought all 3. Paid cash for all 3, and owned all 3 outright. His neighbors who remained, the ones who'd survived the crisis, couldn't quite believe it. Harvey Mitchell, the guy who'd kept farming with old equipment while they bought new, the guy who'd seemed content with his small 240-acre operation, now had 1,440 acres and was the largest farmer in Madison County. Harvey kept farming the 1,440 acres through the 1990s. He was in his 70s by then, but still strong, still working. His son David had come back to help in 1992, took over more of the daily work as Harvey slowed down. In 1995, at age 71, Harvey sat down with David and went through the books. They were sitting at the same kitchen table where Harvey had sat with his father 40 years earlier, going through the same kind of ledgers. "We've got 440 acres paid for," Harvey said, "worth about $900 an acre now. That's $296,000 in land value. We've got $240,000 in savings, total assets of $1.5 million, total debt zero." David looked at the numbers. His father had started in 1955 with 240 acres worth maybe $40,000 and a tractor worth $800. Now, 40 years later, he had $1.5 million, not through aggressive expansion or risky investments or clever schemes, just through farming conservatively, avoiding debt, and buying foreclosed land when prices were low. "Dad," David said, "why didn't you buy more land in the 80s? You could have probably gotten it even cheaper than what you paid." Harvey thought about that. Could have. "But I was 70-something by then, too old to manage more, and besides, I had enough. That's a lesson too, David, knowing when you have enough. Some farmers never learn that. They keep expanding until they collapse." Harvey farmed actively until 1998, then retired at age 74. He sold 1,440 acres in 2001 for $1,800 an acre after prices had recovered. Total sale, $2,592,000. He divided the money among his 3 children. David got money to buy his own land. The other 2 children got enough to be financially secure for life. Harvey lived comfortably on Social Security and investment income until he died in his sleep in 2015 at age 91. At his funeral, over 400 people attended. 3 generations of farmers who remembered the crisis, who remembered the choices made in 1967, who remembered what happened next. One of the eulogies was given by Robert Henderson, Bill Henderson's son. Robert was 52, worked as an accountant in Omaha, had never farmed. He'd been 10 when his family lost their farm. "I didn't understand what happened in 1973, Robert said, his voice breaking. "I just knew we had to leave our home, our community, everything we knew. My dad worked at armor packing for 23 years until he died in 1998. Never talked about farming. I asked him once why we had to leave, and he just said, 'Made a bad decision.' Wouldn't say more." Robert paused, collecting himself. "I didn't understand until I was older. Didn't understand that my father bought a tractor on credit in 1967, and that decision cost him everything. Harvey Mitchell didn't buy that tractor, kept his old one, and that decision made him wealthy." He looked out at the crowd. "Harvey bought my father's farm in 1983, paid cash for it, $64,000, farmed it for 18 years, sold it in 2001 for $576,000. That $512,000 profit should have been my father's. Would have been his if he'd just kept his old tractor, if he'd been more scared of debt, if he'd listened to whatever voice told Harvey Mitchell not to buy on credit." Robert's voice hardened. "My father wasn't a bad farmer. He worked harder than Harvey, put in longer hours, was more ambitious, more driven, but he lost everything, and Harvey kept everything, and the only difference was debt. That's the lesson here. Not that Harvey was smarter or better, just that he was more scared of owing money." The church was completely silent. At the reception afterward, old farmers gathered, men in their 70s and 80s who remembered 1967, who'd been at that dealership event, who'd watched the dominoes fall. George Peterson, age 78, had survived by doing exactly what Harvey did. Kept old equipment, stayed out of debt, bought land cheap in the 80s. "I remember thinking Harvey was a fool in 67, George said. "We all had new 4020s. He was still running that old Farmall H. We felt sorry for him." He laughed bitterly. "Turns out he was the only one who understood what was coming, or maybe he didn't understand it. Maybe he was just too scared to take on debt. Either way, fear saved him. Another farmer, Carl Anderson, 82, nodded. The salesman made it sound so reasonable. $134 a month. Anyone could afford that. What they didn't say was that $134 a month for 5 years was over $8,000 for a $6,800 tractor. And they didn't say what happened if you missed a payment. The banks weren't flexible, George added. You miss one payment, they're calling. Miss two, they're threatening. Miss three, they're foreclosing. I watched good farmers lose everything over a couple missed payments. A younger farmer, maybe 50, spoke up. It's happening again now. Different equipment, higher prices, but same story. Farmers taking on massive debt for new combines, new tractors, new technology. Everyone says you have to or you'll fall behind. And they're probably wrong, George said, just like they were wrong in 1967. The conversation at Harvey's funeral was really a conversation about farming philosophy, about debt versus ownership, about new versus old, about keeping up versus staying solvent. These weren't abstract questions, they were life and death questions that determined who kept their farms and who lost everything. Bill Henderson, Tom Cooper, and Ed Wilson had been good farmers, smart men, hard workers. They'd made one decision in 1967, influenced by peer pressure and sales pitches and the belief that you had to modernize to survive. That one decision, signing papers for $6,800 in debt, had cascaded into losing everything. Harvey Mitchell had made a different decision, not smarter necessarily, not based on superior knowledge, maybe just based on greater fear. He'd said no when everyone else said yes, kept his old tractor when everyone else bought new, and that decision had cascaded into wealth. Years later, Harvey's granddaughter, a woman named Sarah who taught economics at the University of Nebraska, wrote her doctoral dissertation on the farm crisis of the 1980s. She interviewed dozens of farmers, collected thousands of pages of documents, analyzed the data from every angle. Her conclusion, buried in academic language but clear enough, was simple. The farmers who survived weren't smarter or more skilled. They were just more conservative, more scared of debt, more willing to look backwards while everyone else rushed forward. In many cases, they survived by accident, by being too cautious or too stubborn to modernize. But survive they did. And the farmers who'd been confident, who'd been progressive, who'd believed in the future of modern agriculture, many of them lost everything. The neighbors who bought new tractors on credit in 1967 had done what seemed right, what everyone was doing, what the salesmen and the magazines and the agriculture economists all said to do, and they lost their farms. Harvey Mitchell kept his paid-off 1949 Farmall H, ignored the pressure, skipped the event, stayed home working in his shop. And years later, he bought their farms, not through cleverness or exploitation, just through the simple mathematics of debt-free farming. In 1967, the choice seemed obvious, modernize or die. But in retrospect, the obvious choice was the wrong choice. The scared choice, the backwards choice, was the right choice. Harvey Mitchell understood that. His neighbors learned it the hard way.